I have an idea, and that is for your generation to take issue with food waste and food insecurity, because they're actually quite interrelated. My generation hasn't really done that good a job. To some degree, we've tried, but we haven't really been able to get there. So that's how I want to start my talk. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to work with the New Brunswick Food Security Action Network. When I was working with them, I got the chance to visit all 59 food banks in New Brunswick. It's kind of scary, isn't there, 59? We have 59 food banks in New Brunswick, and through that visit, two things came to me. One of them was that, why do we have food banks? And I started really trying to figure out why we have that food insecurity issue in our society. But the second thing that I found out that really bothered me was in those food banks, there was very little, and I mean very little, healthy, nutritious, accessible, and affordable food. And the reality is, it is actually out there. And that's what brought me to today's discussion, because today's discussion is really about food waste, but it's interrelated with food security. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. Now, I'm really against technology, so what I did was I got the folks here with TEDx to install a prompter inside my finger. So when I go like that, the slide will change. Are we good? Okay. So let's look at the issue, right? Now, food has an incredible impact on the environment. And I don't know if you guys realize where the name greenhouse gases came from, right? A lot of it actually came from what goes into our landfills creates an immense amount of greenhouse gases. In fact, as equally terrible for our environment as cars. So you can imagine we have a real issue with the environment and food waste. Ooh. More importantly, let's look at agriculture. Agriculture also has a huge impact on food waste, and it's somewhat of an unfortunate situation for us. We're dependent on globalization now for our agriculture. In the 1950s here in New Brunswick, 85% of the food consumed here was grown in New Brunswick. Now it's actually the opposite. 85% of the food that we consume here is imported, and New Brunswick's become a larger exporter of food than we actually domestically use. And that's kind of a scary situation. But how does that contribute to food waste? Well, when you start thinking about the transportation of food, right? You're talking about the use of gas. You're talking about use of a lot of things. You're also talking about food that's moving from its direct source through a process where there's small percentages of food waste all along the way. And by the way, at the end of the day, that turns into roughly 20% of what you pay for at the store is actually for food waste, not food that's in the store. We got one more to look at, and that's you, consumers. And consumers actually make up the largest contribution to food waste in our society, us. In our daily habits, in the way we consume food, in the way we demand food, directly or indirectly, consumers make up 47% of the food waste in our country. That's an incredible amount. And with that brings me to why we should have this discussion. There's one element that I think we can take some control over, and that is how we deal with food waste, right? Because if we're responsible for 47% of it as consumers, what could we possibly do to move it forward? So I'm going to take you to the next slide with my finger like that. There we go. So how can we change behaviors, right? Because we are a society of behaviors. We're actually food wasters. And I don't know how many of you honestly consciously think about food waste. Think about what you waste in the run of a day or a little week, in the run of a month, and how you contribute to it. So what we need to do is we need to take a look at the situation with food waste. We need to make some changes. So as a consumer, let's look at the first thing that you can do in your change, right? So you can change how you shop. I don't know how many of you shop right now, but we have spontaneous buying habits, right? We go into a store, we think we know what we're going there for, but we may buy extra of this or something's on sale or whatever. But what happens is sometimes we end up with too much food. And the way we shop actually affects food waste because it ends up affecting quite often what you end up throwing out, either way because it's too much. And a pet peeve of mine with the way stores are, they're marketing to us like crazy. When I get to the checkout line, and I'm type 2 diabetic, and there it is right in front of me as I'm walking up to the cash, all the chocolate bars a person could ever imagine, right? Right there at the checkout. But actually, when you think about it, it's all done that way in the store. They're trying to get you to buy, buy, buy. But as consumers, it's affecting what we waste. So let's look at it as another level. I can't even see my own slides. I'm going like this and I can't see them. That's it. Think of who you support. Think of who you support is really important because I'm a huge fan of buy local. How many of you buy local or try to? Nice. Because that's actually part of the future. Remember I said in the opening comments about food import and globalization, how it's affecting food security? Buy local is the right thing to do when it comes to food security. Because what you're doing is you're supporting the local economy, which is good. You're supporting local farmers, which is good. You actually have a shorter period of time between the farmer and the local economy to you, the shopper. And at the end of the day, you are doing something that will help people that are in need. Because my experience is farmers are a lot better with the food banks than the stores are. Truthfully. Because they live here and they care more. Now, hopefully we'll change the mentality with the stores. But the last thing you really need to look at is how you address food yourselves. How many of you throw out food, right? It happens. It's not something you want to do. It happens. Could be a piece of cheese you bought that you left in the fridge, maybe stayed there too long, got a little bit of moldy, throw it away. However, you can affect things like that by how you package your food, right? Use of freezers, use of freezer bags, properly storing your food, planning your food, planning your menu, getting involved in things like canning. All sorts of ways for you to take issue with how you take care of your food. So let's look to the next level, because this is where it gets really important. So did you know that the average consumer in Canada is responsible for 1 pound of food? Now that's taking the whole thing, using you as a ratio. 1 pound of food per day. So if you added all of that up and you put it into a model, in Canada we could fill 60 tractor trailers in a row that would go 1,000 kilometers. So that's how much food is just wasted. And a lot of that food can be recovered. So let's keep going. The business level is one of the ones that I really think we can see change. I'm now getting into just the presentation. We need to see change at the business level. A few years ago, actually, Sodexo, which was one of the food suppliers here in the university, actually came up with a strategy to get rid of trays. And some people had said to me, well, that strategy was because people were stealing them to slide down the hill. Actually, there's another part of the strategy. Getting rid of the trays led to a 20% decrease in food waste. Right? And that's because the way the mind works, tray, food, and if anything's left on it, you can't return it, right? It gets dumped. But on your plate, it's a little bit different. Your behavior is different. So here's an example of how businesses can take issue. Stores can take issue. If we start looking at how stores deal with food, and I'll look at this next one because this is important. Do you know that 1 out of 7 trailer loads of food that arrive at stores gets put into landfills? That's insane. And that's because of food spoilage. That's also because of some of our buying habits. And it's also because when you see that best before date, some of us think that's a scientific date. It's actually not a scientific date. That's the best before date that we use for actually for the store to use that this will be fresh up until that date. After that, it's not so fresh. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. If you travel to any of the food banks, as I did, you'll find that their freezers are full of bread. That's because they get bread donated, thankfully, and they immediately put it in the freezer so it lasts longer because people don't come there every day, right? So there's ways of addressing this, but the truth is, if you take 1 out of 7 tractor trailer loads, we have a serious issue. Serious issue with that. We got to address that. One of the ways you can address it as a consumer is when you walk into a store to buy, ask a store what they do with their excess food. And ask them if they work with food insecurity, if they work with the food banks, because we need to make some changes. So how can we affect public policy? That's probably one of the big ones in the whole discussion. Canada is actually now looking at a national food strategy. It's about time. But in that strategy, what you as a generation need to put front and center is food waste. Because food waste right now, we have really very little regulation. One of the reasons why all that food ends up in landfills is because the regulations allow for, it's $8 a ton, right? Makes business sense. So it's easier to get rid of the food than trying to address the food. Unfortunately, that's the challenge we're up against. In France, 2 years ago, they introduced legislation where it's like a sin tax, right? So if you dispose of food that could have been distributed, you're getting charged an astronomical amount of money as a sin tax, basically. What's happened in France? More money redistributed to the food banks, more people going into stores, and when that bread's almost ready, it's like 10% of its value. That's because it would cost them that much to send it to the landfill. So we get it. So there's lots of chance for change. Your generation, though, you have to start making food security and food waste an issue. Let's keep going. So now we got hope. We got lots of cool things that are going on. And I want to talk about some of them. One of the first examples we can use is things like composting, right? Now a lot of students have said to me, well, you know, where I live, or I'm in an apartment or a building, I really don't have the opportunity to compost. But actually you do. Just like your blue box, right? You can keep all that stuff, and there's places you can take it. If you go in behind Greener Village here in Fredericton, there's large compost bins. Just dump it on there, make your contribution. Composting is one of the ideas. Community gardens. Get involved in food security. Volunteer with your food banks. Help to work with your community. Help to distribute food more. And there's other cool ideas. The next one is actually one of my most serious concerns, and it's starting to happen, and I'm so excited. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term food rescue. But food rescue is basically after harvest. And what happens is you might go out there, you might see an apple tree that's just sitting there and all the apples on the ground. That's because it wasn't market apples or whatever. Well, you pick those apples up, you can make apple jelly. Like they actually can be used for something. So food rescue is one of the ideas that you can start thinking about, wow, we can do a lot and actually access and rescue food. The next one is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term gleaning. Okay, so gleaning is something that's actually gaining popularity, and it's gaining popularity for a number of reasons. So gleaning is the concept of food rescue, but from a different perspective. Let's say 3 or 4 of you got together and you said, why don't we put together a gleaning team? And what I mean by that is you would go to a farm and you would glean food out of the ground after it's been harvested. Because every farm has additional food. Extra potatoes, extra vegetables, extra whatever. But you go up to the farmer before you do that and you say, excuse me, do you mind if me and my friends go into your field and we glean your field for food? And the farmer will say what some of you might say, what's gleaning? You explain it to him. But to the farmer, here's what you say. We're going to glean the food. We're going to give you 1/3 of it because it's your farm. Good idea. We're going to keep 1/3 of it for each other. We're going to distribute it. Good idea. We're going to take the last 1/3 and we'll give it to those that are food insecure. Great idea. A way to contribute back to society, be part of the change, right? And so gleaning is a new idea. Maybe it's new to a lot of you, but you can set up gleaning teams anytime and go out in harvest season anywhere, and farmers will likely let you do that. And food insecurity, by the way, happens right here on campus, right? I don't know if you know the University of Moncton has a food bank. I mean, a lot of students are also hungry and could use extra food. So think about those opportunities for you to get engaged. Uh-oh. How many of you received one of these in your delegate kit? Really? So you're wondering why you got that in your delegate kit? I got one. So this is the ugly carrot. And this is actually a symbol of why you need to get engaged with change. If you went up to a person that was food insecure, here's what they say to you. That's a carrot. Except in our modern market economy, it's a B-grade carrot. What it means is it can't be sold. Stores won't buy it because it's ugly. And consumers won't buy ugly food. Looks like a carrot, it's ugly, tastes like a carrot, cooks like a carrot. And so this is an example of where we come as consumers, because all of these carrots actually quite often get put back into the ground. They're not redistributed, again, because the farmer doesn't have a market for them, can't sell them. But the ugly carrot actually is a movement, and there's actually people all over the place that are starting to embrace this as a concept. Well, but it's still a carrot. So here's what I want to challenge all of you to do. Let's take that carrot, take it home, make it into a soup, make it into a stew, cut it up and eat it with some hummus. It's a statement that says, it's a carrot, and I value food, and I value food security, and it's a start for all of you to start thinking about getting engaged. You have to get engaged in this issue. It's a very serious issue, and you're generation can affect policy, can affect how we address things, and hopefully I'll never have to visit 59 food banks again. Thank you very much. Good.